Hey Keith,
What's up?
we're back.
We're back.
So today we're going to get into the concept of spiritual attachment as opposed to a different kind of attachment we have covered elsewhere and talk about a lot, which is developmental psychology. So this is more of the
It's more
feeling
the
attached.
attachment to everything
Yes,
versus just attachment to a person.
right. Or a child or a parent.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Start us off.
Well, let's get into defining some terms here before we go too deep, because that seems important. When I think about attachment, I think about the suffering that goes with clinging to things in general, not even necessarily material things, but things, ideas, experiences, even people.
Yeah. And let's talk about what clinging is, not being open to it changing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. The suffering of grasping along, trying to hold onto something that you think is leaving or
Mm-hmm.
disappearing.
Yeah. Or something you're just attached to. You don't want it to disappear. You're attached to
Yeah.
the experience that you're getting from it.
Right.
And that can be a host of different areas of our sort of perception, right? In terms of what
Definitely.
we're clinging to.
Any number of things.
We could cling to ideas
Yeah. Our point of
and,
view.
yeah, our point of view, kind of concepts. And then mentally, we could cling to outcomes, right? Like what we want to have happen versus what
Right.
we don't want to have happen.
You could be attached to having a peaceful experience.
Right. And that can be kind of all the way down to a sensory experience, but all the way up to sort of a mental experience attached to sort of equanimity in the mind, lack of challenge in our thinking narratives.
Right.
Mhm.
It could extend to feeling suffering around a health challenge. So being attached
Right.
to your health could be a form of attachment to peace or not being disturbed by something.
Be attached to pleasure.
Right.
We're all
Security.
attached to pleasure,
The things, the symbols that we have in our lives of security.
security. Going to pleasure, would you say the pleasure principle is talking about attachment or not necessarily? The Freudian pleasure principle of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Maybe not.
Well, I think it maps well the Freudian principle to the Buddhist principle of the ego. And that if you think of the ego as, again, we're in defining the terms here, ego as a manager, that's job is to sort through inputs into our experience and assign valence emotional tags to them. I want this, I don't want that. And then I'm indifferent to this other thing. So in Buddhism, it's sort of a filter of what are the things that I like, that I want, that bring me pleasure? What are the things that I feel threatened about or think might bring me pain? And then the things that I don't even notice or care about.
Right. Yeah. And then so you're attached to your ego, like that whole construct of what that thing is doing. You're sort of attached to the whole mechanism and how we understand who we are and our pleasures and our preferences. And there's like the whole concept of attachment is just sort of embedded in there in ego.
Yeah. The ego's attached to its own operations and its own survival for sure.
I'm attached to being me. I want to be more of me. I don't want to. Some people are not attached to themselves, actually. Some people want to be other people. I mean, that's a form of attachment in another way,
Yeah, that's an
right?
interesting idea. I mean, when you say you want to be more of you, do you want to be more of your ego or do you want to be more of something else?
I mean, on some level, I could say I want to be more of something else, but there's got to be ego in there, right? I mean, if I say I'm attached to becoming more of myself, it's like I'm not attached to like disappearing into like the higher self infinity state and there being no Keith. I tried
Yeah,
that game
I
for a
mean,
while. I was attached to that game for a little while,
yeah.
actually.
How did that go for
While
you?
it didn't go that well. I mean, it was helpful on some level, but it also, I don't know. I think I think I sniffed something out there for myself of like, for right now, I could just say for like at some point, I was like, at this point in my life, I'm going to stop pursuing that. I don't know that I'll never pursue that again. I mean, I might actually. Think you ever pursue like full dissolution of attaching to yourself?
Well, definitely. I mean, I had my own path with that. You and I were in different spiritual traditions, but it was a similar, I think, fundamental kind of teaching around what suffering is and how to not suffer as
Right.
much.
Do you think
Um,
you'll ever go back all into that?
well, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's a lot more compelling to me to do what we're doing right now, which, I feel like we have big aspirations, big goals of, our shared mission for our company is to bend the arc of mental health care globally. That's a pretty grandiose, you could say, if you want to pathologize it, kind of vision. It's a grand vision. I'm much more interested in pursuing a grand vision of change, positive change in the world while surfing the edge of attachment and how to accomplish things without getting run over by the clinging to the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little level of, I mean, obviously there's a level of attachment to even have a vision like that. It's not devoid of attachment, right? To just be like, I want to change mental health care. Well, why? Like, why are you attached to that? So there's some level of attachment, I think, in there. And I'm also much more interested in playing the game of, attachment isn't inherently a problem at all. And yet we can get ourselves into heavy, entangled experiences in ourselves when we get very attached to things.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
you can go into all kinds of extreme states and even mental illness. I mean,
Hmm.
I can say, I don't know if it's probably not accurate for me to say that I've had clinical or diagnosed depression from a clinician, but in these moments that I can get into where I'm extremely attached to something that I think is going away, I can be, out of my mind. I
Well,
can,
I think it's definitely fair to say I've had plenty of clinical diagnoses in these states. So
yeah,
you probably have had some clinical diagnoses at times in your life. I mean, everyone
sure.
really has. But yeah, I mean, you know, do ulcers count? I
I think so.
think that's it. I think an ulcer is like the body's signal of you're too attached to something. Maybe,
I think so. I think that's fair.
yeah.
Stress is a symptom of
When you start
heavy attachment.
eating away at your own body,
Yeah.
you're eating your own stomach because you're you're devouring from an attached place. You're like
Oh,
gnawing.
man. Painful.
Yeah. So coming back to the different types of attachment, obviously you can attach to the body, like I don't want to die.
Right.
I don't want to. I mean, you could also be attached to the mind there. You could be like, I don't want my body to age. Attached to youthfulness. That's a huge one. I mean, who's not attached to youthfulness on some level? We all
Well,
like age and see moments where we find out where we were attached to youthfulness over time.
well, and there are different varieties of that, right? There's the form of pride, subtype of pride that's vanity, right? Which is your
Mhm.
appearance, how you appear to other people. But there's also the youthfulness that when you say that word, I think about energy and vitality, and the ability to do things that a 20-year-old can do without thinking about it.
Is that an attachment? Maybe. Maybe it's so let's say let's actually play with that for a moment. Just to keep breaking down, like what are we talking about with this word attachment? Let's say you're playing the anti-aging game, longevity game, right?
Hmm.
You're doing things to try and live longer.
Right.
Isn't that coming from some version of attachment to being
Arguably, yeah,
alive? I would
definitely,
think so, right?
for sure.
So maybe this is where it's like this delicate razor's edge of like, where is that sort of like it's a healthy, there's an attachment that leads to generativity for you and others. But then there's a form of attachment that can actually lead to more destructive energy.
Hmm. Well, let's look at this longevity thing for a moment, because I think there's a spectrum there, right? And I don't know why this image just popped into my mind when you said that, but I want to explore this. Let's say you're a meditator, you live in a cave, you subsist on the generosity of others, people drop off food for you, whatever. And you have one cup that you can drink your tea from, and that's the only cup you have, and it's made of clay. And then you drop your cup and it shatters, and you have feelings about that. Is that person attached to their cup?
Yeah. They're attached to being alive and
Mhm.
meditating more. They're attached to getting to experience meditation longer.
Uh-huh. Right, exactly. Right.
Versus just dying
Right.
and going into some state that's not that.
So, in other words, attachment to having a human experience or attachment to awareness itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all these are all outlined in different traditions in different ways.
Hmm.
States of samadhi and states of, it's talked about in different traditions of like transcending different states of attachment, really.
When I
To
was studying
Yeah.
when I was studying Tibetan Buddhism for about 10 years, we studied the varieties of attachment, and one of them that really caught my eye and has lived with me is the suffering of change.
Mhm.
Just the simple fact that the sun that's, a little bit above the horizon right now, above the mountains, is going to be below that in an hour is a change that I'm gonna feel that. Oh, it's a little bit colder,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
I'm attached.
Some people are like, the sun's going down, and it's like, thank God I get to go in bed soon. And other people are like, the sun's coming up, and they're like,
What?
some people are like, oh
Yeah.
shit, the sun's coming up. And some people are like, oh shit, the sun's coming up.
So there's this interesting thing that we do when we start. I'm curious if this is true for you. For me, when I started learning about the different kinds of attachment, I started getting the idea, and this is a spiritual ego kind of development that was happening, is like I started getting the idea of, okay, cool. If I'm not attached to X, Y, and Z, then I won't suffer about that. And so now my project is to not be attached to those things. And then that's also a problem because now you're just adding another layer of attachment. I'm attached to becoming not attached so that once again, so I'll suffer less. I'm still attached to suffering less.
My main couple early teachers taught often about that the spiritual path is narcissistic for a very long time. It's very much a path of attachment for a very long time. It is not truly in service of letting go for a very long time. There's a sort of a hint and like some kind of compass and or lighthouse beacon of like, I think I want to let go, but really it's a narcissistic pursuit of
Right.
elevating one's ego's expansion,
Right.
of experiencing greater states of pleasure is
Exactly.
actually where it starts. Less pain, more pleasure.
Well,
That's
why
really where
would
it
you
starts.
the whole industry of self-improvement is based on someone is suffering and something's being offered to make them suffer a little bit less, right?
Yeah, almost
There's,
anybody. I mean, I think anybody that goes on a spiritual path, especially when we're talking about spiritual attachment, like, which is on almost every spiritual path, you're going to be exploring this concept. You're starting from a place of wanting to get beyond the pain you're in.
of course.
But you're often in the beginning for a very long time, you're actually just seeking pleasure, attaching to pleasure states, and you're building avoidance states around the pain that you were already in and you're already
Right.
avoiding. You just actually, there's a whole delicate process where sometimes you're just actually solidifying that even more. And like that's a long pursuit to sort of unpack that.
It is, and you can get lost in various places along the way.
Many people
Or
get lost in dissociative
um,
spaces. Actually, I know many
right,
people that did.
definitely.
They end up in this pursuit of attachment. And, we're talking about letting go, or experiencing more freedom. Many people get lost into a dissociative path where they're actually dissociating from pain into sort of a pleasurable dissociative state on the spiritual path.
Yeah.
not not really letting go of anything along
Right.
the way.
Well, the
You're just kind of
dissociation,
moving your attachments.
well, or the dissociation can be just an insulation between you and what's happening outside of your body so that you're less
Mhm.
prone to feeling the sharp
Right.
edge of the pain.
It's like a desensitization tool.
Yeah. It's like wrapping yourself in bubble wrap so you don't actually feel the pain anymore. But you think, okay, cool, I'm on my way. My spiritual path is, I'm climbing the mountain.
Right.
But what's actually happening is you're down at the bottom still with a big bubble wrap around you.
Can we wrap ourselves in bubble wrap and walk around one day? See
Sure.
what that would be funny.
If we can run at full speed against each other and then bounce off, that would be really fun.
Or just like go into the supermarket and bubble wrap. See if it shields us from anything.
Another thing that can happen, and this is really, it's kind of shameful to admit this, but at the height of my uh, identity as a Buddhist, and what actually broke it, what caused me to walk away from calling myself a Buddhist, I still meditate inconsistently, but what caused me to leave that identity was a moment where I was practicing. I was on a family visit, so I was on vacation visiting my family, and I used to have a lot of really intense emotions that would come up when I visited my family. And so the way I was using meditation was to, balance myself out. Nothing wrong with that. But I was doing this practice, and all of a sudden I woke up to, I had separated myself from my family and I was practicing. And I realized all of a sudden that that my identity as a meditator, as a Buddhist, was a way for me to feel superior to my family. And that
mm,
by feeling superior to my family, I could feel safe in myself. It's like
mm,
I got my life figured out over here. I'm a Buddhist. I'm a meditator. Like you guys, you know, I don't know what you're doing, and it was so painful to observe that a lot of my practice at that time was about establishing an arrogant sense of superiority over the people around me that triggered
oh,
me. I was like,
oh.
uh oh.
So is that why you
Uh
didn't is that why you didn't come to my wedding? 'Cause were you still on that trip? I think you were. Um,
oh.
uh,
That was a different trip.
that was a different trip.
Different trip.
Slightly different trip. It probably had a little quality of sort of I'm free to do what I please.
Oh, now I understand what you mean by trip. I thought you were talking about which location I was.
Oh no, talking about the mind
Okay.
trip of
The mind trip.
attachment.
The mind
Let it
trip.
go.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. My early journey was abstaining from attachment. I didn't do a very good job at this journey, just to be honest here. But I was on that sort of concept in my head of like withdrawing. There's this concept in yoga, withdrawing from your senses, withdrawing inwards, withdrawing from attachments. And my early journey was like create as few attachment as possible, not necessarily to like a partner, but just in general, material objects, pursuit of outward goals, material goals, all that kind of stuff. And sort of, so I was kind of on the abstinence train on some level. And then at some point, what happened to me was I said, well, I'm not, I'm not actually good at this abstaining game. Like I'm not going to ever become a monk and really truly do this. Like it's just not, I'm not good at it. Like I don't like it. I'm not ready to fully commit. And I think that somehow I kind of was realized like, well, what if I, instead of abstain from attachments, I pursue attachments and make that the dojo of
Hmm.
like in the game of attaching, can I also let go and find freedom? Is there a way to do this? And so then it's like I sort of changed my whole perspective and I stopped, going really deep in practice. And I started having to use a lot of that time pursuing attachments, really, right? I mean, you only have so much time in a day. There was a time where I got to like meditating 4 to 6 hours a day regularly in my 20s.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? What if I just spent all this time pursuing attachment? And can I somehow grow there? And can I somehow also let go and not get too attached? And um, I think the the current status is I'd rather I'm producing an outcome in the world that I I don't feel like I will let go of right now, and it's working on some level, and there's still a lot of attachment suffering in me. I'm being honest with myself. Like I think I get better at it and kind of loosen the grip more and more over time. But yeah, attachment's attachment, and there's some level of suffering with that cycle.
One dimension of that attachment and going into it and trying to surf the wave is this question that I've had a number of times with a friend of ours, Tammy Simon from Sounds True, and it has to do with this percentage of what actually you're responsible for, or the actual amount of influence that you have on the outcome of a particular situation,
Mm-hmm.
personally, versus with your effort versus what's actually coming together in a complex and difficult to understand soup of different things coming and operating and cooperating together to make an outcome happen.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how you're thinking about that in your life. Do you think the things that you apply yourself to, you get all the credit and all the blame, whether it happens or not? Or is
No.
your sense that you're cooperating or dancing with something, the universe, or however you describe it?
I definitely think I'm dancing with natural laws. That's for damn sure. I don't think that I have complete control over over natural laws. As like I can't completely change physics and things. I think that there's things outside of myself that are out of my control. I'm definitely not in the belief that if my mind is just in the right enough place, then everything will happen and the outcomes will happen. So, whether I believe in like the next sort of level beyond what we know scientifically about the universe and laws, and is there another organizing principle that's outside of my control? I think there's something that's an organizing principle that I don't understand that I'm also dancing with.
Yeah.
I don't know that that organizing principle knows that I exist, but um, in the way that I imagine it does. But whatever that means. Um, I think I have a little more self-reflective thought over it than. But with all that said, I do think I'm dancing with things outside of my control, and I don't know what percent of control I have. But I think when you bring that conversation into attachment, let's say it's an outcome. Let's say you want to get married this year, you want to have a kid this year, or you want to earn X amount of money this year, or you want to have this amount of impact, you want to have this many influencers in your social media, or whatever it is, right? I think it's actually an important part of the conversation of attachment of like to control. Like how much are you attached to controlling the process? And then part of I think the letting go is can you align with reality of how much control you actually have? Are you taking that in? I don't take that in all the time. I mean, I definitely don't. I get into modes that I don't even realize I'm doing where I'm in high anxiety states and stress states because I actually think I can completely control the situation.
Yeah.
In reality, if I just let in more, I would be like, I can't completely control the situation, which means I can't control the outcome completely.
Right. It's
Easy to
interesting because
forget. It's easy to forget that. It's simple, easy truth that everyone knows, or most people know. I mean, some people
yeah.
don't believe that.
Well, it's this sleight of hand, I think, that the ego is famous for, I would say, is the idea that having total control would mean that the ego doesn't need to be anxious anymore. But of course, we never have total control. And so the fantasy that we could, or that somehow if we did the right things, we could get there if other people did the right things, if they acted the way we want them to act. This is a big one, the attachment to control, and the fantasy.
Well, that's interesting. It's like, so whether you have an attachment to living or an attachment to not losing your partner or an attachment to earning X amount of money or an attachment to pleasure or an attachment to your home, if you really let in that you have there's a lot of things outside of your control around keeping any of that stuff, what happens to your attachments if you really let it all in? But then what happens to your attachments to all those things? If you actually got aligned with reality, do the attachments start to fall away?
Well, two things happen for me, and it doesn't always happen this way. So there can be like a terrifying version, and I can go into that in a minute. But the two things that happen to me that actually feel healthy, arguably, I'm just calling something pleasurable healthy here. But what feels good in the moment to me is I have a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
When I acknowledge that things are out of my control and I may never, this could be the last time that I see my friend again. Like that thought can enter my mind when I'm saying goodbye to someone that I care about. And that helps me be more present. And then I feel more gratitude. So I have more gratitude and more of a sense of humor. And that actually feels like a healthier place for the ego to be, is more flexible
Mm-hmm.
and more,
Mm-hmm.
more grounded in the fact that we don't really know what the hell is going on ever. Or what's going to happen.
Or what's going to change.
Yeah, exactly.
Ever.
And then, yeah, exactly. Ever. And so
in
then
any moment.
That's right.
We don't even know if we're going to be here in a second from now.
That's right. That's exactly.
No clue.
No idea.
We want to attach to the fact that we will.
Yeah.
We do attach to the fact that we will.
Yeah, we're operating on that assumption all day long.
That's right. I am.
Yeah.
And any sign of sickness or,
right.
With my surgery this summer with the tumor I got, like, oh my God, what? I thought I was going to be here in this moment. Now I'm saying I might not be. Am I going to wake up from surgery?
Right.
So it's we all face this deep dilemma in ourselves.
So
but
then
I like
let's
what
talk
you're
about
saying, gratitude.
the
Gratitude
terror.
helps me too.
Okay, cool. But then when things get ripped away in a violent way, right? Like you get a diagnosis of a tumor on your spine, or I find out that something, I need to go get a medical test for something, and I don't know what it means, if it's going to be okay or not. It's very interesting because it's similar, I think, in a lot of ways to what can happen with a psychedelic, right? You could have a really pleasurable, blissful, okay, it's not just me, I'm not alone, I'm attached to everything. My sense of separateness, my sense of self is open and flexible and fuzzy, and it's warm and it feels great. Or you could be having the most terrifying, annihilating, maybe interpretation of a
shattering.
very similar, shattering. You could take a year or two to come back from, right?
It could.
And
yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, are those just two different versions of responding to something really, a lot of change all at once?
Say the two versions.
One is like the blissful. In psychology, we call it ego syntonic, right? Something pleasurable. I'm melting into the universe. I'm melting into God. I'm finally feeling my inner divinity. And divinity's everywhere. And my boundary of myself is just like a very thin veil, and so on. Or my identity is shattered and I can't even find myself anymore. I don't even know what I am, who I am, how to be.
I think they're both versions of attachment, for sure. I mean, there's no doubt that you can be attached to not experiencing pain and attached to experiencing bliss, right?
Yes, definitely.
So they're both versions of attachment. And then again, these are described in the states of meditation. As you get to higher and more open states, you're burning through sometimes you're burning through the attachments to the pleasure in those states. You don't want to let go to the observer.
Right.
Right. So like the highest state is the observer is completely dissolved. There's no distinction anymore. You're gone. You don't even get to experience it.
Exactly.
It's over.
Exactly.
You don't, there is no you experiencing anything anymore. And I mean, that's a very rare state. It can happen on psychedelics. I mean, that does happen, those windows, no observer.
It can happen in
Often.
advanced meditative states or
Absolutely.
practices for
Absolutely.
sure. For sure.
And so there's sort of these levels, and so it's like we're sort of dancing with where do you want to play?
Mhm.
I mean, unless you're really truly going after, I'm dissolving the observer entirely while I'm alive. I'm going to go for it. Whether it happens or not, I am going for that. And maybe you do that. Now, if that's really your only mission in life, you're probably sitting in a cave, I would think. I mean, maybe somebody can do that while they're like being a family and going to work, but it seems unlikely that you're really going to pull that one off. Right.
Yeah. Too many
I mean,
distractions in the
you could
world.
become a teacher, obviously, of
Right.
meditation or
Right.
something. I mean, I don't even know at the highest level of samadhi, like what happens there. But so we're talking about the dance of like this huge spectrum of like, well, where do you want to play? Like, can you play in some way where you sort of are aware you're attached and you're working with the fluidity of trying to move from attachment to freedom, openness, attachment to letting go. You're just like, you're playing in that fluid space slowly, kind of the slow burn down of the observer, the slow burn down of the attachment of the ego, just like very slow. It's a slow burn. The
It's a
karma,
slow,
it's called the karma yogi, and it's actually a slow burn for the karma yogi.
it's a slow burn. And
You know, the slowest burn in yoga among the types of yogis is the philosophical yogi. You know about this? The philosophical yogi, I think it's called a Nana yogi. I might have that pronounced wrong. It's the yoga of philosophy. And
mental,
philosophy is a path, right? A
uh-huh.
philosopher is a path to liberation. It's the slowest path, one of the slowest paths, but it takes you there. It can take you there.
That's funny.
I might be one of those
You might
characters.
be. You might.
I think I'm one of those guys, actually. I'm sort of a blend of the slow, I'll take my time at this and be a little karma yoga, but also some philosophy mixed in there.
I think the current level for me is acknowledging that the human apparatus has quirky and sometimes very ridiculous claims and um, and weird needs that pop up out of nowhere, and
Uh-huh.
all kinds of like cravings or just negative thinking or whatever the thing is, and
Uh-huh.
and to be able to be with my own, like to hold my own ego with care in the way that I might experience even delight with like a 3-year-old child, like who's just discovered language, is asking all these crazy questions like why is the sky blue, and like having that kind of attitude toward the insanity of the ego
Right.
is a really high state for me right now. I don't
Uh-huh.
know what comes after that, but anyway, it's a state of, like you said, delight or play. It's like a
Uh-huh.
playful way of just being with what is. It's like, yeah, there's a thing here, and there's awareness itself too, and
Yeah,
that there's this, you know, if you will, flawed human that's here, and that doesn't need. I don't need to be all perfectionistic about the fact that the human is not enlightened.
exactly. I mean, we're not enlightened, and as a species by any means. I mean, we're a very attached species. Our
Yeah,
attachment level is, if you kind of take the species as a whole, the attachment level in the consciousness of the species is pretty high in terms of,
yeah.
this concept of spiritual attachment.
I don't. Yeah, I don't think that the ego can do enlightenment. I don't. It's not
Yeah,
a doing
it's actually
function of
not the
the ego.
function.
Yeah,
No, the whole thing of liberation is dissolving that.
yeah.
So, but yeah, and that's also just probably where we're at in the evolution of our species. I mean, hopefully, maybe this gets more fluid and loosens a little over time if we last long enough. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it gets worse. Maybe we don't know where this is all going, right?
It feels very unclear which way
It's
we're going.
unclear. It's like it definitely seems like it's hard to know which way it is going already. Are we getting more
Yeah.
attached?
Yeah. And
I would imagine, I mean, when you take more like integral philosophy, you start from a place of with no self-reflective object. There's no right? There's no observer as you go far enough back into the species. And then the observer starts to develop over time of like, here I am, I exist. And so there's, a thing that's evolving over time. And I would say like, we're in kind of the meat and potatoes stage of like, we're very attached as a species
and
to
you know,
existing.
I mean, given what we were just talking about of how painful change can be and is, we're going through faster and faster change every year.
Right.
You know, we've got all kinds of environmental instability. We've got political and, financial instability. There's all kinds of problems with the haves and the have-nots getting further apart from each other. I mean, it's just really it's just an intense time to live right now. So it makes sense that we're seeing more mental illness or more
Yeah.
anxiety,
Yeah.
stress, depression, and so on.
Totally. So it's a delicate balance of riding the horse of attachment, taming the wild horse,
Yeah, yeah.
having desire, pursuing outcomes, letting go as much as we can in that pursuit. It's a
I
delicate
think,
balance.
yeah, I mean, striving for what our friend Robin Card Harris calls psychological flexibility, right? To have I'm referring to him for people who don't know his name. He's a psychedelics researcher who is showing that inflexibility and psychological stiffness, if you will, is something that you can see on brain scans that can open up and relax during a psychedelic experience. And then
Mhm.
if you meditate like Keith did in his 20s, you might be able to establish a more flexible mindset through hard work and practice
In your 20s.
in your 20s, but then you lose it when
And
you
then you
decide
lose
that,
it when you stop. It's not like a bike where you just hop back on and go, actually. Like with meditation, you try and hop back on later and you just fall off the bike.
yeah, you've got a wheel missing that somebody took, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Your chain's broken, your frame's bent. You got to repair the whole thing and build it up. Speaking from experience of, I mean, I was actually more, it was longer for me than just my 20s, but it was well into my 30s. It's really in my 40s that I completely, my mid to late 30s and 40s that I was like, I'm going to just not do that for a little while.
yeah,
So now when I meditate, which is not often, it's, in my 20s, we were talking about this earlier. In my 20s, like hitting very low level samadhi states, like, there's very advanced samadhi states, but like low level, like discursive thinking, cessation, like
sure,
I was experiencing that.
yeah, same
Um,
here, yeah,
and man, that was fucking powerful back then. And I was going there a lot.
mhm,
Now, like I'm just practicing thinking when I try and meditate.
mhm.
That's what I'm practicing.
I know, same,
It's like a whole different game now. So it's interesting, like how that changes too. Someone, Reggie Ray, I met with him when I was like 35, 34. I wasn't in your sangha, but I said I wanted to talk to him, and I was asking him about these states I was going into in meditation and of thought cessation and these different states. And I was like, tell me about it. Like what? And I described the state. And he said Trungpa calls them Mahavapassana, those states. And the state of limitless, it's like being in a sky of just
mhm,
like limitless, no clouds in the sky is how he described. And he's like, He's like, but I will tell you something. Reggie told me this then. He said, you will lose this and it won't come back potentially for a very long time. And at the time, I was like, nah, I know how to do this. I lost it. I totally walked away
Right.
being like, no, I've got that. You don't know what you're talking about. That's not me.
That's funny, Reggie.
Completely gone. I haven't been in that state in decades
Yeah.
at this point. Isn't that interesting?
Would you say that the memory of that state still has impact on you? Is
Yeah,
that-
I think so. I think
Yeah.
very much so, for sure. I mean, I think it altered my ego and my perception of reality big time.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say the same thing about when I was studying with Reggie. We used to do a lot of group retreat, but we also did a lot of solitary retreat. And I spent in my 30s, I added it up one time. It was over a year of my life in retreat, across a bunch of different retreats. And once I was in for 2 weeks in the mountains of Colorado by myself. And I had this experience of no self that it's just very hard to describe, but it was so vast and there was nobody there. And it was getting late in the day. And I didn't want to get up off the cushion because I was having this experience and I didn't want to interfere with it. And then I got up and made my dinner and it continued. And then I went back to the cushion after dinner. It was still there. And it was this really, it was impactful, not just in the moment, but also, it continues to be something that I touch into when things get very nasty in my mind.
Yeah.
And I need to
Yeah.
remember that there's a bigger context inside
Yeah.
of my experience than just what I'm thinking about or what I'm feeling.
Totally. I think that I actually have sort of a kind of visceral memory of those states. It just pops in
Yeah.
often, but it's not the state.
No,
It's not
it's
the
a memory.
experience. It's more of the memory, actually.
Yeah.
You have that too?
And of course, memories are distorted as
Yeah.
we know that just on a physiologic level, they get altered every time you call them up. So that's an interesting problem as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Non-attachment, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the deepest, I'm just having this memory since you're asking about this stuff, like memories, like the deepest, my memory of the deepest state I ever went in. I was in Oroville. Did you ever go to Oroville, India?
Yeah. I've been there. Yeah. I passed through there.
You know, the dome, what is that
Yeah.
thing called?
It's
So
huge.
it's almost always closed. Anyways.
Yeah.
So it's closed. But I went and meditated near it. And I was like, oh, maybe this will, whatever. And somebody was playing John Denver in the background. And so I'm sitting there and I'm meditating to John Denver. And so just meditating John Denver, like this is great. Like and then it was like I dropped into the deepest state of the observer, dissolving. And it was like I remember like a heartbeat of openness, of just like the energy pulsing in this open, limitless space. And it's like I that literally comes into me often, that memory. So these things matter. And this happens with psychedelics, where people have an experience with psychedelics and the memory comes back.
Yeah, definitely.
And people have, scary experiences on psychedelics and the memory comes back too.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you're fighting, you're clawing your nails into the universe to not let go. I actually have many of those. I think I have more of those memories than the memory of openness, but I actually think I get more flashes of kind of the clinging and holding on. Like, no, I don't want to go. Stop this. I don't want to go.
Well, what I loved about meditation and what is again is a parallel with psychedelics is how it amplifies what is there in your mind.
Yeah.
Like you slow down enough to see what's going on there.
Yeah,
and
totally.
what's inside of you, and that's a huge blessing. It's a huge opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too with attachment. It's like, letting go. I think one thing with psychedelics for me is like at the most primitive level, in some of my scariest moments, I'm like, don't you know that I matter? Like, I don't want to go. I matter. You know, I actually matter. Like, I'm not ready. I fucking matter. And people think I matter, and I matter to them. And, you know, it's like I'm basically screaming at the top of my lungs, I matter.
You do matter. You matter to me.
Well, yeah, but then like a psychedelic sometimes shows you there are ways you don't matter.
Yeah.
You know, and like talking about attachment to mattering, like, right?
Totally.
Like on very sort of primitive, simplistic parts of the ego, it's like I matter. It's not just I am. Like there's an attachment there, but it's also like I matter. That's the next thing.
Sure.
And it's like we don't want to let go of that attachment.
No.
That's a hard one to let go of.
That's a really hard one.
I've even spoken to people, you know, in their 80s, that are like they're not ready to go. It's like they matter still. Like I still want to matter. I still want to be here. I still want to experience my family. Whatever. Other people matter. It's a hard one to let go of.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the framework of not knowing what's next after death, right?
Right.
We have no clue. There's a lot of stories you could tell yourself, right? You could. And I think those stories matter too, about how we feel about our attachment. People that I meet who are 1000% convinced that what happens after death is better than this have very little concern about the end of this. There are not many of them. I haven't met many of them.
That think what's next is better.
Will be better. Yeah.
Do you think that there's many people who think it will be easier?
Easier. I mean, there are people who think that not having a body will be easier, if there is such a thing as not having a body and still existing.
And people who think that not existing will be easier than existing.
Sure, of course. Yeah. Of course.
I mean, I think that many spiritual traditions will tell you not existing is easier than existing.
Well, and a lot of people with suicidal thinking think that, you know, they'll be better off dead. And so will the people who love them.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's helped me with all of that is that, and it's partly an attachment, but it's also just like a reality check of like, I get a blink of an eye in the age of the universe to come here and reflect on the fact that there's an experience here of some kind and just create meaning about that. And maybe we're the only people doing that. We don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
What do you mean we're the only?
Maybe we're the only beings that are self-reflective, actually creating meaning out of any of this. We don't
on this planet or anywhere in the universe.
Anywhere.
Okay.
Maybe this planet is it. We don't know, but that doesn't matter. What matters is like, okay, I get this blink of an eye to where I get to just create meaning. Like, I'd like to like try and extend that blink a little bit longer since I have it to like try and get through this meaning game to something that's really cool. And, you know, impact meaning in some way for others that has this blink of an eye be better.
Yeah, a little bit richer, a little bit
richer, a little bit deeper, a little bit more fulfilling, a little bit less struggle, less strain. Maybe strain's a better word than struggle, less strain. So that helps me with, you know, if times are really hard in my life, or, you know, I've been through some waves of, not many, but some waves of like suicidal thinking and stuff. But it's like, yeah, we get a blink of an eye. Like it's going to come very soon. It's coming soon. So you might as well play the game and try and find your way through the strain and create some meaning that matters, since you were given the gift of meaning making. We were given the gift of meaning making.
If you're going to tell a story, tell a good story.
Yeah. Create some cool meaning.
Yeah.
Well, should we wrap up?
Yeah, it seems like a good time to do that.
All right. Till next time.
Till next time. Thanks, Keith.